So this weekend is week 3 of a 3-week series we've been at Zion called Entrusted. And just in case you haven't been here or you're a guest here, kind of let me catch you up since you're kind of coming in at the end of the movie. At the heart of the Christian faith is a very simple and yet very profound invitation, which is this: to trust in Jesus. We are called to trust in Jesus for who he is. Christians believe he's the Son of God and the Savior of the world. We are called to trust in Jesus because of what he has done. He has won for us things like forgiveness of sins. Our sins no longer need to oppress us and condemn us. He's won for us things like not only life, but eternal life. Death can no longer defeat us because Jesus has promised us that there is a life after this life. At the heart of the Christian faith is an invitation to trust in Jesus. But we've been learning in this series that just because that is at the heart of the Christian faith does not mean that is the only important part of the Christian faith. Because a very important part of the Christian faith is this: if at the heart of the Christian faith is who we trust in, an important part of the Christian faith is what we entrust. Because if you follow Jesus, you are called to entrust everything that you have and everything that you are to him. And so you entrust all the bad stuff about you to him. All of your sin, all of your shame, all of your guilt, all of your regret, all of your remorse. You can give it all to Jesus because he can take care of it for you on the cross. Now, you're also called to entrust all the good stuff of your life. All of your hopes, all of your dreams, all of your aspirations, all of your passions. Everything that you love, you're called to give that over to Jesus because he loves it too, and he will love it for you. Now, you're also called to entrust to Jesus everything that you have. Your family, entrust that to Jesus. He will take care of them, even as you take care of them. Your resources, entrust those to Jesus. Your stocks, your bonds, your savings accounts, your bank accounts. Give all of that to Jesus because you know what? He can use it for good stuff even as he has given it to you. And it's actually this last thing that we are called to entrust to Jesus that this series is all about. Because in this series, we're talking about entrusting our finances to Jesus. Now, I said this the first week of the series. I know that talking about money in church is kind of a treacherous topic because there's an old stereotype, which is this: all the church is after is your money. All the pastor wants into is your pocketbook. But here's the reason I think it's so important to talk about this every once in a while at church. Here's why. The reason it's so important to talk about this is because at church we talk about Jesus. And you know what Jesus talked about sometimes? He talked about money. Now, if you're kind of concerned with that, here's kind of the way that I want you to think about this, okay? Jesus actually talked about money a lot over the course of his ministry. And yet you may have noticed something. Even though Jesus talked about money, he never actually asked for money. He never took up a collection. He never held a fundraiser. And yet he talked a lot about money because Jesus knew something about human beings. He knew that money seems to occupy a very unique space and place in our lives and in our hearts. We all have some sort of relationship with money. Sometimes money is something that we think about, like when we make our family budget or when we make a budget at work. Sometimes money is something that we dream about. If you have ever wondered what it would be like to win the lottery, then you've dreamed about money. Sometimes money is something that we worry about, like when we feel there's not enough of it. But regardless, we all have some sort of relationship with money, and Jesus' desire and Jesus' goal is that we have a healthy relationship about money. And that healthy relationship and starts with entrusting our money to him. And that's why we're doing this series. And so this weekend, we're going to be walking through and working through this parable from Jesus in Luke chapter 16. Now, when we kicked off this series a couple of weeks ago, we walked through another parable that Jesus told about money because Jesus tells a lot of parables about money. And I mentioned this a couple of weekends ago, but just as a quick refresher, a parable is a story that Jesus tells with a point. Because in a parable, Jesus is looking to reveal a couple of things to us. He's looking to reveal to us something about God and who he is and how he works. And he's also looking to reveal to us something about ourselves and who we are and how we work. And Jesus is going to do that in the parable that he tells in Luke chapter 16. So here's the story from Jesus, Luke 16, beginning at verse 1. Jesus says there was a rich man whose manager was accused of wasting his possessions. So he called him in and he asked him. And he said to him, "What is this that I hear about you? Give an account of your management, because you cannot be my manager any longer." So Jesus says, once upon a time there was a rich man, and he was like, not just rich, he was filthy rich. He had a lot of money. In fact, he had so much money that he had to hire himself his own personal CFO, his own personal chief financial officer. Usually businesses have that. Well, this was an individual who had that because his estate was so huge, his portfolio was so large that he couldn't keep track of it all. And so he hired for himself a personal money manager. But the money manager came with a problem. This rich man probably should have checked a few more references on his LinkedIn profile, because it turns out that when this manager began managing his money, he did a lousy job. Rather than making more wealth for this rich man, he squandered the wealth. And every single financial check-in that this rich man did with his money manager, whenever he looked at his balance sheets, they weren't going up and to the right, they were going down. This rich man, every single day, every single week, every single month, every single quarter, and every single year, was becoming a little less rich. And so finally, he says to his manager, "You know what? This just isn't working out. I'm sorry, you're going to have to go. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to go. I want you to get the books that you've been keeping, and I want to do one last check-in with you. I want to go line by line and see how all of my assets are doing, and then you're out of here." And so this money manager finds himself at the beginning of Jesus' story in kind of an interesting situation, because he's just been fired by his boss, by his master. And yet, even though he's been fired, he still has the keys to the place. And he still has access to the books, because he's been asked by his master to go and get the books so the two of them can review the books. Now, this rich guy probably also should have hired an HR guy, because an HR guy will tell you that when you let somebody go, you need to usher them out the door at that moment. Because in just a little bit of time, a person who's been fired and is bitter can do a whole lot of damage. They can sow seeds of discontent and discord among other staff members, or even worse, they can begin to steal your files, or maybe even doctor your files. And this is exactly what this manager does. Luke 16, verse 3, the manager says to himself, "What am I going to do? I'm in trouble. I just lost my job. My master's taken away my job. I'm not strong enough to dig. I'm more of an indoorsy guy. I like air conditioning, okay? I'm not good with construction. And I'm too ashamed to beg. I don't want to be one of those people on a street corner with a sign that says anything will help. And I certainly don't want to be sleeping on the street, but I don't have money to pay for my own place. What am I going to do?" And then it dawns on him. Verse 4, "I know what I'll do, so that when I lose my job here, people will give me a place to stay. I won't be on the street. I'll be able to sleep in somebody's house." So he called in each one of his master's debtors. Turns out that one of the reasons this rich guy was so rich was that he would lend money to people and then he'd charge it back with interest. And so he was running like a savings and loan industry on the side. And he asked the first debtor, "How much do you owe my master?" Now, this should give you just a little bit of insight into what just a terrible money manager this guy was, because he shouldn't have to ask a debtor how much he owes, right? He should just know. But he was terrible with money, terrible with numbers, terrible with books, so he has to ask the debtor how much they owe, and the first debtor says 900 gallons of olive oil. I want to show you something, okay? Take a look up here on the screens. This is H-E-B Organics Extra Virgin Olive Oil, all right? 25 and a half ounces will run you $9.34 at the H-E-B on Williams Drive and Shell Road, just in case you're curious, all right? Now, if you multiply that, you get about $46.88 per gallon of that nice olive oil. Multiply that by 900, and you wind up with a total of olive oil worth $42,200. Apparently, this guy really liked Italian food. I mean, he really liked Italian food. This guy somehow managed to rack up a $42,000 debt worth of olive oil. Well, here's what the money manager does. Verse 6, the manager says to him, hey, take your bill, sit down quickly, and cut it in half. Make it 450 gallons of olive oil, which means this manager just saved this debtor $21,100. But the manager keeps going. Verse 7, he asks the second debtor, and how much do you owe? 1,000 bushels of wheat. This would be about $8,000 worth of wheat. And he said to him, well, take your bill and make it 800. And so this guy shaves about $1,600 off this second guy's debt. Now, imagine that you're one of these debtors. And you got the CFO of an organization calling you into his office and saying, hey, I want to cut you a deal, okay? I'm going to give you a loan relief program, and I'm going to shave literally thousands of dollars off of what you owe. What would be your response and reaction? It'd be like, wow, thank you so much. This is the first loan I've ever paid where I didn't have to pay back more because of interest. I was actually able to pay back less. This is incredible. Just so you know, if there's ever anything I can ever do for you, I will be there for you. You just let me know. To which the money manager is thinking, well, there might be something you can do for me sooner than what you think. You have a guest room? Because I might need it. And so that's what this manager does. Debtor after debtor, account after account. He shaves off literally thousands of dollars until he's cost his master millions of dollars. Now, it's at this point in Jesus' story where everybody, you can just feel it and see it. They're leaning in. Because they know that there's no way that this money manager is going to be able to get away with this. You can't make millions of dollars disappear and expect nobody to notice. It's not a question of if this money manager is going to get caught. It's just a question of when. And the question becomes, what happens when he gets caught? How mad is this rich man going to be? What is he going to do? Is he going to send in police to raid his place in the middle of the night and carry him out in cuffs? This is Bernie Madoff level stuff here. Squandering millions of dollars. What's the trial going to be like? Is it going to be so big it's going to be on court TV? Who's the judge going to be? Who's the jury going to be? What kind of lawyer is this guy going to be able to get? Is the DA going to be on the case and turn this into a prosecutorial bonanza? What's going to go on here? And how much time is this guy going to get? Is he going to get a life sentence? Because he could certainly get a life sentence for this kind of stuff. Or maybe, even in this day and age, you could even get a death sentence for this kind of stuff. What's going to happen to this guy who has just robbed his master of millions of dollars worth of his money? Jesus continues. And he says, this is what happens to this guy who has just robbed his master worth millions of dollars of his money. Verse 8, he says, the master commended. In other words, he congratulated the dishonest manager because he had acted shrewdly. Now, it's at this point in the parable that everybody listening and they're leaning in, it's at this point that everybody goes, wait, what? What? This money manager just robbed his master worth of millions of dollars. And this master gives his money manager a pat on the back and says, way to go, you got me? What? And it's not just those people who are thinking that. It's probably maybe even you who's thinking that. In fact, the ethical stakes on this parable become even higher when you remember what a parable is. A parable is a story that tells you something about God and something about you. And so whenever you read a parable, you need to look for the God character in the parable, and you need to look for the human character in the parable. So here's the God character in the parable, the master. He's the one with all the resources, all the money. He's like God. The human character in the parable is the dishonest manager, because whether or not we want to admit it, there are all times when we mess things up and then we try to cover things up, and sometimes we even try to make things go our way, just like the dishonest manager did. But even when we do it, we know it's wrong. And even if we do it, we know if we get caught, we're going to be in big trouble, but this manager doesn't get in trouble. I thought parables were supposed to have morals. This parable seems to be immoral. You know, one of the things I love about Jesus so much is that he is a master storyteller. And he does it right here because everybody thinks they know how the story is going to go. But then at the very last moment, Jesus takes a left turn and gets everybody thinking and going, what? And it's at this point when Jesus begins to lean in. And when he says to the crowd who's listening to his story, now that I've got you thinking, here's what I want you to think about. Verse 8 of Luke 16, you know the people of the world? People like the money manager who robs his master. Well, the people of the world are actually more shrewd in dealing with their own kind than are the people of the light. Jesus says, you know, out there in the real world, people are real good at cutting deals. People are real good at forming alliances. People are real good at making bargains. You see it all over the place. You see it in business, you see it in politics. And you know how people make deals and form alliances and get bargains? This is how they do it. This is how friendships work in the world. If a business becomes friendly with another business, how do they do it? Because one business is giving another business a really good deal. It's because of money. If a politician manages to get a piece of legislation passed, why do they pass it? Sometimes it's because of a lobbyist who is promising a donation to the campaign. It's because of money. And I know that seems and sounds and feels a little bit icky, but here's the way I want you to think about this, Jesus continues. If that's how the world works, there is a little something we can learn from that when it comes to how we work. And here's what we can learn from that. Luke 16, verse 9, I tell you, you can use that same worldly wealth to gain friends for yourselves. Just like people in the world make friendships with money, you can make friends using money. But remember, you know this, one day it's going to be gone. One day you're going to be gone. The old saying goes, you've never seen a U-Haul behind a hearse. One day it's going to be gone, you're going to be gone, it's all going to be gone, but when it's all gone, you will be welcomed into eternal dwellings. A little bit of technical work here for you. New Testament written in Greek, and I want you to focus on that word, you. You will be welcomed into eternal dwellings. In Greek, it's plural. So in Texan, it's y'all. Here's Jesus' point. Your temporary money can make an eternal difference. Because when you are generous with your money, when you give your money, when you bless someone with your money, that can begin to endear them to you and open up an opportunity to you to tell them about Him. To tell them about Jesus. And so here's the question that Jesus wants us to wrestle to the ground with this parable. Here's the question, are you going to use your money, Jesus would ask, to tell people about me? To reach people for me. Because when it all comes down to it, there are only two ways you can use your money. Only two. First way, you can use it on yourself. Second way, you can use it for the sake of others. It is so easy to love money because of what it can buy for us. It's a little harder for us sometimes to give money because of how it can bless others. How are you going to use your money? In fact, I was thinking about this master. He's such an interesting guy. Because this master, he could have, if he wanted to. He could have thrown the book at his manager. He could have. He could have brought him up on charges. He could have drug him into a trial. He could have gotten a conviction. And he could have thrown him in prison and thrown away the key. But he didn't, even though he could have. Now, you know what that's called, right? That's called grace. That's what it's called. It's called grace. Now, here's the thing. In this parable, we're like the dishonest manager. We really do use money, sometimes for the sake of ourselves, just like the dishonest manager did, rather than for the sake of others. But even though we can be like the dishonest manager, we are actually called to be like the master in this parable. And here's the real moral of the story. The real moral of the story is this: just like the master, sometimes you got to choose people over profits. Just like the master, who shows mercy to a manager instead of just being concerned about his money, sometimes we too are called to show mercy rather than to just hoard money. And so let me ask you, what would that look like for you in your life if you did that? What would it look like to buy the model level down in that new car you want? To give a little bit more to charity? What would it look like to go on the slightly less exotic vacation so you could share a little bit more with somebody in need? What would it look like to live on just a little bit less so that others could have a little bit more? You know, there was a man who lived exactly like that. Richest man in the history of the world. And the reason he was so rich was because not only did he have riches, he was actually the author of all riches. He was the one who created them all, and yet he gave them all up to come to this earth and to actually live in a way that we would consider in this day to be just flat broke. And yet, even out of his brokenness, he continued to give. When he gave healing to the sick, and when he gave sight to the blind, when he gave food to the hungry, and when he gave his life on a cross for sinners like you and like me. And make no mistake about it, If Jesus wanted to, he could have thrown the book at us. He could have thrown us into condemnation and hell, and he could have thrown away the key, but just like the master, he didn't. And you know what that's called? That's called grace. The Apostle Paul puts it like this in 2 Corinthians 8, verse 9. He says, you know the, what's that word? Grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, that though he was rich, yet for your sake he became poor, so that through his poverty you might become rich. So let me ask you again, when it comes to you, what are you going to do? How are you going to spend your money? Only two ways. On yourself or for others. What do your finances look like? Or here's another way to put it. What do you want to be remembered for? Do you want to be remembered as somebody who loved money or as somebody who loved people? Because sometimes it can be that stark of a distinction. In fact, just one more thing before we wrap up. So Jesus tells this amazing story. Everybody leans in and everybody's listening and everybody's wowed by the way that Jesus crafts and spins and leads them through this story, except for one group of people who are listening. There are these Jewish religious leaders. They're all sitting there. They're a group of Pharisees. And they are less than impressed. Luke 16, verse 14, the Pharisees who did what? Who loved money. So we know what camp they're in. They're listening to Jesus and they're going, okay, Jesus, this is idealistic. This is nice. It sounds nice, like, up here in some philosophical region somewhere, but it doesn't really work very well in real life with real finances and real pocketbooks and real bank accounts. Jesus, you are just being hopelessly altruistic. Come on, Jesus, get a life and get real about the way the real world works. And they're just annoyed by Jesus and his talk about money. In fact, they're so annoyed that when they heard all this, they were sneering at Jesus. A little bit more Greek here for you. It's a very colorful Greek word for sneering. It means to blow somebody's nose. Not making this up. Really means to blow somebody's nose. The idea is the Pharisees are so annoyed with Jesus that they're snorting and need a Kleenex. That's how mad they are at Jesus. Now, do you know the names of the Pharisees who were so mad at Jesus? You know what their names were? Anybody know? Neither do I. The only thing that we remember about these guys, and the only thing that history records about these guys, is that they loved money. What do you want to be remembered for? What do you want history to record about you? My brothers and sisters, we can get this right. And so, let's get it right together.